Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Compensation Insider Talks. And this time we'll be speaking more around the hot topic of the town, which is pay equity. And we have with us Jessica, who sort of will be guiding us into firstly what pay equity is, what the trends have been, how it is changing, and the best practices, do's and don'ts. So Jessica, before getting started into the topic and explaining what pay equity is, why don't you give us a quick intro about yourself and how exactly you landed up in the domain of rewards? And then the
hmm
first question would be defining pay equity, what it means for the organizations, what it means for employees. Yeah, but first, if you can just introduce yourself and then the pay equity.
hmm Yeah, so I have been in the HR space for 10 years now. I started in recruiting, so I started on that side of the house and then moved more into generalistic roles, which led me and landed me into my specific niche of benefits. Compensation then came after, which led me into the total rewards function that I lead today. So today I have a team of four in which we lead total rewards as a whole for the company that I'm with now. And it's inclusive of payroll, HRIS, benefits, compensation, workers' comp, LOA. So there's a lot that nowadays that goes into that total rewards function, of course. But compensation, yes, being one of those key pieces.
Right, right. And Jessica, the first things first, you know, pay equity as a conversation has always been there, right? But of late, it has picked up a lot of steam because of certain regulations that have been passed, right? And this is just some of them. Eventually, these are going to get stricter and stricter. So,
Right.
for a start, maybe why don't you brief us about, in the US, when people talk about being more equitable as an organization, uh, what exactly do they mean? One in spirit, and then another from a legal standpoint. What are they most worried about, or what are they most, scared about when they think of pay equity?
Yeah, so kind of going back to this will actually blend back into the definition of what pay equity is. And simply put, it's equal pay for an equal scope of responsibilities, regardless of any other characteristics. So, obviously, then from a legal standpoint, what comes into play is are companies compensating fairly without being biased or discriminatory against factors that actually don't pertain to performance in a job and ability to do complete certain responsibilities. So, from a legal standpoint, then what they would, I guess, be most scared of would be lawsuits or someone coming after or trying to come after a company for not paying fairly for an equal job of for someone else, right? So maybe a gender gap or discrimination against any other characteristic, like I said, that doesn't have anything to do with your ability or skill set to do or perform a specific role and responsibilities. So from a legal standpoint, that has definitely kicked up. I would say companies are obviously because we're seeing a lot more laws around pay equity in general. So that would be that to answer your question about what companies were, I guess, scared of. That's what it would be.
Right. And Jessica, of course, paying people more equitably, more fairly is, of course, also the good thing to or the right thing to do, right?
Right.
But where is the challenge then? The companies want to pay their people more fairly, more equitably. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
then why is there the need of this law to sort of govern somebody, right? Because if everybody wants to do it right, why exactly it is not happening
Mm-hmm.
right? What's the problem? And I ask this question also, Jessica, because you've seen the talent acquisition side of things, and now you are in the reward side of things. And what I see is that there is a constant tussle between the rewards team and the talent acquisition team, where the I would say the key performance indicators for the talent acquisition team might be to hire on time, hire, not maybe hire equitably, right? Whereas the rewards team might always be chasing becoming more equitable or hiring within the band or things like those, right? So now, because you've been in both the shoes, uh, if you can answer, why does an organization at the first place become inequitable, right? If they want to
Hmm.
people more equitably always, why disparity at the first place?
Those are a lot of really good questions. So I'll kind of pick it apart, and if I miss something, let me know. But um, how a company becomes unequitable in the first place, it really comes down to because companies, simply put, didn't have compensation policies or practices around compensation in place, which means you just have any hiring manager coming up with a comp based on their thought process, and that doesn't necessarily align with the next hiring manager, or it doesn't necessarily align with the possibly talent acquisition, right? Like, and as you said, sometimes there can be, I guess, that tassel between total rewards trying to keep equity, and then the recruiting teams who might just they're trying to hire the right people in, of course, and they want to make sure to get that talent in, which is their function. But then it comes down to education. I think a lot of what can be resolved comes down to education. And the more what people don't know, I guess the less likely they are to be on board with something. So if they don't understand it, they're obviously less likely to be on board with it, and to
Right.
not understand what the repercussions might be to have an inequitable workforce, which none of those people, necessarily the hiring manager or sometimes the TA team, might not necessarily think about that. I have the privilege of working right now. The TA team that I work with right now is pretty keen and actually takes part in our compensation meetings. So it works out really well. But that's now because, right, that's education. She's seeing it in the forefront. But companies and industries become off balance when there isn't any sort of process in place, and you just then have anyone coming up with compensation for a role and not comparing it to a similar role in any sort of way. There's no process in place for that. So it's just like someone coming up with it on their own, like, biases. So that's where we come from, and I have come from a company where comp was completely new to the company, and that's exactly where it was. There were just random, I mean, it was completely at random almost. I mean, if you took a look at what was happening in the comp side, like from a comp side, you'd have the same people in the same roles, and they're drastically different in many different ways. It would make no sense to a comp professional, but and that is a challenge for companies to get from that point to equity. And it's sometimes, and it's difficult for business. That's why it gets that way, right? I mean,
Got it. Got it.
yeah.
Right. But Jessica, help me understand. Is it so that pay equity is important for some companies and not important for some other companies, or that has to do with
Mm.
the maturity of their rewards team? That our rewards team will come and they'll put sense into people that, hey, you know what, we have to be more equitable as an organization. Is that really the major factor of why some companies are not equitable, and then once they have a rewards team, they tend to become more equitable? And if there's a law governing pay equity, isn't that already sort of non-compliant, and they are actually maybe messing up things and they might be sued? Don't you think
Yes.
that is true, and people should be taking it more seriously?
I do think people should be taking it more seriously, and it is a potential that, again, kind of going back to what you don't know what you don't know, and
Right.
you might have the right mentality from a leadership standpoint, right, from an ELT type of level of a
Correct.
standpoint, where they have a basic understanding of the fact that we need to be compliant in this. We need a department to ensure compliance in this, where we're not having random hiring managers or just anyone jumping in and trying to create a compensation package. Plus, that also, in a sense, in some ways, it equals itself out, right? There might be, you have hiring managers who will offer something astronomical for a scope of responsibilities that shouldn't be that too. But I do think that having a total rewards function and a compensation committee, however that might be set up within your organization, is absolutely going to ensure more compliance in that department, because you have the same consistent people, the same consistent eyes who are trained to look and review and analyze this data, reviewing and analyzing the data, and it's not, it's, you don't have so many hands in the pots. But I think that so yes, I guess to answer your question, yes, I would say having a total rewards department would absolutely ensure more compliance in every set of. I don't necessarily think though that some companies just don't. I don't know if I would say that they don't think it's important. It's probably more so that it it's being looked at from a budget standpoint more in some ways, and there's a potential. It's difficult to bring equity all at once from a budget
Interesting,
standpoint.
interesting. So the first challenge then to becoming more equitable as an organization is really the knowledge around pay equity in the entire
Yes.
org, that your talent acquisition team has to understand what being more equitable means and why that is of value. That is number one challenge. And the second challenge then is that since you have already probably messed up in being an equitable organization the way you have grown up, the second biggest hurdle to becoming equitable then is the cost of becoming equitable,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Can you talk more around that, Jessica? And usually, when do the organizations actually start becoming more equitable? Is employee strength an indicator that, hey, typically I've seen companies upwards of 500 in employee strength or upwards of 1,000 in employee strength start talking about being more equitable, or employee strength doesn't really is an indicator. Maybe the first rewards hire that is made in an organization, that is the sort of starting point of becoming more equitable as an organization. Also, I'm because you would have seen both the eras before 2023 and post 2023, when laws started becoming more and more stricter
Mm-hmm.
around equity. So uh, how do we know that a company is trying to be more equitable? Is it safe to assume that a company, let's say, which is upwards of 5,000 in employee strength, would be more equitable as an organization, or may not be the case, and there are still a large number of companies upwards of 5,000 or upwards of 1,000 that are still doing nothing to sort of become more equitable, or that is not at all true because there are laws and then everybody is scared?
Mm. So that is a really good question. From my personal experience, I would say that employee strength probably does have. I would think that that would have a weight on a factor, a big playing factor in whether or not a company starts to recognize that they might have a problem,
Got
I
it.
guess, in a sense. So if, and also having, so from my experience, I should kind of go back to that, is like I had mentioned, I previously worked for a company who had no compensation policy or practices
Right.
whatsoever, and it was they were about 2,000 employees at the time,
Right.
and it was, interestingly though, not necessarily thought of as, when we brought the comp practice into the policy and practices into fruition, when we actually implemented, we really only started doing that in order to obtain the right talent from the market. So in actuality, I'm kind of recognizing this as we're talking this through. It wasn't brought in for equity. It was brought in to assess the market talent, to ensure that we're getting the right talent with the market. And with doing that, then we recognized there were equity issues more so. I mean, you I guess didn't really necessarily know. So now that I'm putting these puzzle pieces together, it's almost like hey, we need to make sure that we are grabbing the right talent from the market, that we're going to be able to retain that right talent from the market. But then once you start comparing and hiring in similar roles that you already have, right, you're trying to compare, but you're also leveling some of them up. You start to recognize that in some departments, in some same roles, your minimum for hire is higher than someone who's been in the role for 5 or 6 years, and so
Right.
that creates a problem. And years of experience isn't the only item that you would look at, of course, but someone who should be brought up to that market rate that we're now hunting for, right? We're taking that and we're hunting in the market for that. You have a department who has a complete mix of inequitable pay, and it
Correct.
becomes a problem for the hiring manager. Now they don't know what to do with that. How do I tell how is it that, because at this point you can't prevent people from talking about their pay, which is a whole nother factor. And I've lived through that too, where I remember when you couldn't talk about that. I mean, even within the last year, I had a leader who wanted to let someone go because they were discussing their pay. We can't do that anymore.
Right.
But this did create a little bit of turmoil, and then people did start talking about their pay a little bit more than they had in the past. So it almost like brought some of that to life. And yeah, it was because you put a compensation policy and practices in place. So I don't, I guess maybe it is that it's put into place without necessarily knowing what it was, maybe more so just to ensure we're attracting and retaining the right talent. So from my experience, likely you learn as you go in that space.
Got it. So, further to our conversation, just wanted to understand one more aspect around laws in the United States, which is around being more transparent with respect to pay, right? There were some laws that came into effect in 2023, 22, and more states are now sort of adopting those laws, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
let's say there's an organization which has not done anything with respect to pay transparency until now. What would your recommendation be? How should they go about it, right? Be it building ranges or sharing within the teams or publishing job postings. How should they go about by, getting into those practices?
Yeah, so I think honestly it would take a step back, because I think if they have not taken any strides towards these new laws that are pay transparency, I would say to avoid overwhelm, you might want to start with, first off, reviewing job descriptions would be the very first place that I would start, is reviewing job descriptions, making sure, first off, some companies might not even have job descriptions for every job. And so you can't really do anything with compensation unless you know what the jobs are. So my first recommendation would be to take a step back. Obviously, you're going to have to still abide by the laws by putting the compensation ranges within your postings. So for that, I would still recommend having a compensation tool in which you have vetted and they have trusted market data to be able to comp the job. But obviously at that point, that means you're ensuring that a job description exists for that new job. And then you still have to take some steps back to look at your current jobs and ensure that you have job descriptions for all of those. So it would be a step-by-step process, looking at the job description to ensure that you have them and that they are accurate, working with the managers to make sure that it's capturing, they're all up to date, right? You're capturing the right tasks that each job has, each responsibility. So after that, then you can take those jobs through your trusted and vetted compensation tools to ensure that you have the correct data around it. I wouldn't say in those companies that you might want to just jump right into pay bands. Like, you might want to get a feel for what jobs you have and what duties those jobs include, and running those through those vetted comp tools first, because it can be overwhelming for especially a smaller company who is really new to the comp space. There's a lot that goes into this. So I would say starting there would be probably just like the best practice, to start a little bit smaller and ensuring that you have that stuff in line first. And then, of course, every new job that comes through the pipeline needs to be run through those compensation tools. But it's also a matter of ensuring that whatever compensation tools you're using, it's trusted, vetted market data. Because you can Google, there's a lot of things you can Google, and Google has that new AI tool, right? That's like summarizes sources that it's found. It's not always 100% vetted, so you just have to be careful with that. That's why I think tools like yours, and we use salary.com and pay scale, so pay factors. We know that data is vetted, data like that. So I would say, my advice would be taking a step back before you're like, oh, we're just going to formulate pay bands and salary. I think you need to go further back than that first.
Got it, got it. And Jessica, can you also help us understand some of the most common hurdles that would come their way when they are starting with creating job descriptions? So coming to the job descriptions part first, whose responsibility it is exactly? Is it the rewards team's responsibility to create a job description, or the hiring manager's responsibility to create a job description?
I would say a lot of that responsibility lies with the hiring manager, because the total rewards team wouldn't necessarily have that direct insight to every single job that would be in an enterprise. So you really do need to hold the hiring managers accountable for understanding what their team's responsibilities are, and then appropriately assigning those to each individual on their team. That would be a part of their responsibility. We can take that back and then vet it against the market. Does this make sense as a whole? But truly the nitty gritty of understanding what each task should be would be the responsibility of the hiring manager.
Got it. And is this how it is followed right now? As in, do hiring managers actually create or write job descriptions right now?
Yeah, so I have in my experiences, they essentially do like a dump of what they think the job might be, and they work alongside the recruiters. Typically, in my experience, recruiters will have a intro call with the hiring manager to get an understanding of what the job is that they will be recruiting for, what are the hiring manager's needs, and then the recruiters solidify what that looks like in a template and kind of clean it up and make sure that it aligns with the company's templates. And then that typically comes over to compensation. And at that point, then what I've come to find is really beneficial is to actually have one of those recruiters on the compensation calls. So not only is the recruiter working with the hiring manager to ensure understanding of what they are going to be recruiting for, but then that recruiter is a part of the compensation conversation, ensuring that, us in total rewards or in compensation have a full understanding of what the hiring manager is after. Because sometimes it's extremely beneficial to understand it a little more in depth than just what's on paper.
Right.
So that's what I've come to find is extremely helpful.
Got it. And Jessica, so becoming transparent with respect to pay as far as the laws are concerned is one thing, but what's your take on overall this step of the government to make ranges publicly available in every job posting? Is this the step in the right direction, as in giving your candidates a view of what is the sort of compensation range for a particular job? Does that really help everyone, or does this further the cause of becoming more, as in reducing disparities and making fair pay a reality? Is that something which is helping that cause, or do you think that is too much of an information overload on candidates and now they can come up with more unreasonable demands?
That's a really good question. I don't personally think that it gives them ammo to come up with unreasonable demands. If it's clear enough, then in reality, you have the responsibilities and the tasks that would align to that pay. So if someone, and or skills, right? So skill set and education experience, you have that. I guess companies would have that on their side to be able to say that if you don't have these X, Y, and Z and skill set experience, and or can't bring this to the table, then it wouldn't align with this pay. So I don't necessarily think that it gives them, I think it actually helps them, because then they have a clear idea of how to get to that compensation. Say they want to make, let's just put an example out there. I would have a goal of making 100K within the next 2 years. Well, you could, in reality, then you could job search just like you normally would. But at this point, you can kind of start to see what jobs have that price that you're looking for added into the posting. And you can get an understanding of, okay, what skills do I need to learn? Where do I need to develop? Where are my weaknesses? And where can I develop myself more in order to align with those descriptions, which align with that pay? So in my opinion, I don't necessarily think that it gives them ammo to do the opposite. I can certainly see and speak for that. It's definitely difficult for companies. There's resistance to change, and it's a hurdle to get past. It's a process, because budgets are now a little bit more tricky. So I definitely understand that that's a huge part in this, but I don't think it necessarily gives the candidates ammo to make demands that are completely off base. I think it actually does the opposite, personally.
No, that's a wonderful point, Jessica. In fact, one of the other reasons in favor of this effort has been that now candidates are more aware of whether this job is for them or not. Otherwise, a lot of candidates just ended up applying randomly without, having an understanding of the depth of expertise that actually might be needed. Whereas now the applications will be a lot more sane, and hence it reduces the effort at the recruiter side to screen them and, a lot of those things. Absolutely true. But with so much information, Jessica, being made available publicly, right? More and more states would adopt these laws. There is one more source of, I would say, true data or authentic data with respect to ranges that is available, which is via job posting. So now let's say you as a brand compete with, let's say, 50 other companies that you consider in your peer basket. And if you were able to come up with a one-to-one mapping of roles, for example, let's say an SD1 in your organization corresponds to SD2 in this, SD1 in this, software engineer in this, you would be able to create market benchmarks just on the basis of the job postings that your peer basket is doing. Do you think that is going to be a game changer with respect to benchmarking, or do you think that is still going to be trash and may not be worthwhile to actually have a look?
You mean let me just make sure I understood your question. So you mean companies essentially comparing their pay bands to other companies' pay bands? Is that what you're getting at?
Precisely. And how they're changing over time. Because today, I, as an organization, ABC Limited, ABC Inc., might be, say, posting between $80,000 to $120,000, with the midpoint being 100. But maybe 4 months later, I'm posting at 90 to 130, with the midpoint being, let's say, 130, right? Or 120. That means I have now increased the compensation at which I'm hiring for the same role. That leaves some indicators around where the market is headed with respect to my peer basket for a certain role, right? Do you think that is going to be, because there's more than 1 million data points, authentic data points that are being created on the fly as we speak, right, on a monthly basis. How relevant do you think those are going to be in the future with respect to additional source of data for creating more scientific compensation ranges or more realistic compensation ranges? Do you think that is going to be relevant?
I mean, I think where my mind goes is I would still prefer to rely on, we do dive into, it's nice to have a source of where you're diving into other job postings and you're specifically, like, you're scraping the web essentially for job postings.
Right.
And that is a source of data, of course. But I think that's where these comp tools are still going to be even more relevant, because it's essentially we're putting our trust in and paying for the vetted data from these sources versus essentially spending our time stressing about all of our competitors and what they're posting and trying to spend the time digging for that ourselves versus so instead of doing that, continuing to, I think that in that space, these comp tools are going to become more relevant at that point because it's impossible for one person or two comp analysts, however an organization might be set up, to essentially try to scrape data like that and compare, pulling from one ABC company, XYZ company, and like comparing on their own. I think that becomes, it does. It's information overload. I think that would be like an impossible task to assign to one or two people in a company. Do I think it's relevant data? Yes. But I think in the space of these comp tools, they're taking that, they're ensuring that they are vetting data that's in the market now, which is why I do think that these tools are going to continue to be relevant and become more relevant. So no, I do think that is an information overload for an individual comp analyst at ABC company to be vetting that and scraping data or job postings for all their competitors, for sure.
Got it. Interesting. And just one last question, Jessica. As a member of the rewards team, what do you think is that one still very pressing or unsolved problem that really bothers you or irritates you as a comp professional that you wish was solved and no longer existed?
That's a really good question. I think that probably the hesitancy around change is still pretty heavy. And I don't necessarily know that there's really I'm not sure that there's really a quicker way to go about it. Sometimes it just takes time and familiarity because you do still have companies who, instead of getting out ahead of pay transparency laws, you see a lot of companies who are only posting the ranges for areas in which they're required. Because you can tell that, that shows the hesitancy around full commitment into the pay equity, pay transparency space. And I think if I had to pick one, that would probably be it. I think it's just going to take some time and familiarity. It's just like any big change, and it's a big change in the space of pay.
Got it.
If I had to pick one, that would be it.
No, wonderful insights, Jessica. It was lovely chatting with you. This will be live soon. Firstly, thank you so much for taking out time and doing this with us. I'm sure the audience will have a lot of takeaways from here, and use this knowledge to sort of become more transparent, more equitable, and have more people being paid, fairly than discriminating. So yeah, thank you so much again for taking out time and doing this with us, Jessica.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye.